When you get scared in some way, you know that you can respond in one of three ways. You can fight, you can flee, or you can freeze. I like to warn people that I'm a fighter. So jump out and scare me if you want, but you've been warned, okay? You know, a lot of times in our culture, I think that we look down upon those who might freeze or flight. That's not the right term, or flee. We look at that as if that's what cowards do. In the face of something scary or difficult, they lack courage, they lack bravery, and so they freeze up or they flee, they run away. That in our culture, in our day and age, that those who are brave, they fight in those kinds of moments. Today I want to encourage you to open up your Bible to Genesis chapter 39, and we're going to see Joseph when he flees. And I want to argue that today that's the most courageous thing anyone could do. There are times in our lives that it's time to flee, especially from some certain situations that we are faced with. Before we read from Genesis 39, I do want to welcome you again to Crosspoint on our VBS kickoff day. It's going to be a lot of fun in here tonight. And so I encourage you, if you haven't yet been able to register your child or grandchild or invite your neighbors, you still have time to do that. And if you're not volunteering, I do just want, everybody here has a job to do starting tonight. I want to ask, encourage, challenge, plead for everybody to be in prayer over this week. We have a lot of people volunteering, giving of their time. We want to pray that it's a blessing to them. We have a lot of kids and families represented showing up here tonight. And I want to pray for some of those kids because I am almost certain that this is going to happen this week. There's going to be a child who catches a glimpse of our God in a way that they have not yet, and that because of something that happens this week. And our job is to just be faithful with what God has given us and to represent Him as faithfully as we can. And our hope, this is our prayer, our hope is that some small seed of faith will be planted in the souls of these children. And we want to pray that those will grow, that will grow over time. My hope, and every time we do something like this, is that there is a day, in a decade down the line, that some child says, because of that week at VBS, I have faith today. That's our whole goal with it. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to be silly and all of that. But our hope is that through all of these different things we do, is to help pass on faith to the next generation. So everyone can be praying about that this whole week, and we appreciate you for doing that. Last week we started a series on Joseph. We started in Genesis 37, and I mentioned that because this week I was planning to say we're going to cover maybe the darkest moment of Joseph's life. But last week we covered when his brothers stripped him and threw him in a pit. I don't know that it gets darker than that. That's definitely challenging, but Joseph is going to face some more challenging things this week as well. I want to go ahead and warn you from the outset, today's subject matter is not rated G, but I didn't write it. It's in the Bible, okay? So, I don't know. Take it up with someone else. But especially parents, just so you're aware, that you've heard these stories before, some of you, but that's the story we're covering today. Joseph, we're going to cover 2 chapters quickly because they kind of go hand in hand. He faces 2 very difficult situations, and how he handles them in part is the message. There's a lot for us to learn in how he handles these. We left in Genesis 37, and he had been sold into the house of Potiphar. So Joseph is going down to Egypt as a slave, and he's going to serve in Potiphar's house. Now, Potiphar, we're not sure, I'm pretty sure it's not his name. Most likely it's his title. And one of the reasons we know that is because in Genesis and in Exodus, the biblical writers go out of their way to not name Egyptians. At the beginning of Exodus, you will see that the writer will name 3 Hebrew midwives by name. You'll know their stories. However, they will not tell you the name of Pharaoh, which would have been really nice, by the way, to date what happened, because the Egyptians were really good at keeping records, but they don't do that. It's the biblical writer's way to be subversive to the empire. That these are the people who are powerful, right? Pharaoh and the people who work for Pharaoh, like Potiphar, the captain of his guard. We don't get their names because they're not important in this story. They may have all of the worldly power, but they don't have the real power. Because even here in Egypt, we'll see that God has the ultimate power. So here we go. We'll start in Genesis 39, verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph, so he prospered. He lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw the Lord was with him, the Lord gave him success in everything he did. Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. All right, so, and I'm going to skip forward here in the text because the writer here just keeps saying the same stuff for the next 3 or 4 verses, just kind of rehashes it. Look, this is how well things are going for Joseph. He's in charge of everything. He rises to the level of number 2. He's not Potiphar, but he's next. In fact, we're about to talk about Potiphar's wife. You could argue that Joseph outranks her. Obviously, has a different role, but he's in charge of everything. So while technically he is a slave here, he's in charge of all of it. What the writer of Genesis only alluded to in Genesis 37 now is making very clear. The Lord is with Joseph. At the beginning of his story, he talks about the dreams that he has, but he talks about it as if you had a dream last night. He doesn't even go so far to say this is from God. But in here, now we read very specifically, very overtly, this is because of the work of God that Joseph is being successful. So we need to keep that in mind, that this dream will be successful only because of the work of God in Joseph's life. Verse 6, so Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he didn't concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well-built and handsome. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But Joseph refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master doesn't concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one's greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you're his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. I think the writer here wants you to know one thing very specifically, that Joseph has not been Egyptified. I think I made that word up. But he is going to still be his own person. You saw it very clearly there. He said, "No one is above me here." That's his way of saying, not even you. And yet I am not going to do this. Now, there's something we should just acknowledge for a moment, is that when this story happens, because what Joseph says here is quite interesting to me. How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? Well, this story is happening before the law is given. So while it might seem obvious to us, you might ask yourself, why did he find something wrong with this? Again, I think it's, for our purposes, it's very obvious why you shouldn't sleep with another man's wife, okay? However, she's asking, the law hasn't been given. Where does Joseph get this? How could I sin against God like that? Because there's a way to understand this, to say that maybe it was culturally appropriate. Maybe it was allowed. I mean, most likely Potiphar had multiple wives. I mean, maybe it's okay. Maybe on some level in their culture, it's even, celebrated. But Joseph here says, how could I do such a thing and sin against God like that? There are times that there are just categories of sin, I would say, that no one has to tell you they're wrong. You just kind of know. Right? It's like even as a child, when someone takes a cookie or whatever off of your plate, you know that that's wrong, right? No one teaches a child the word mine. When they encroach upon it, you know it's not right. And I would think that this falls into that category. No one has to tell you that this is wrong. And yet Joseph, while he might could get away with it, It might be a culturally appropriate. He's not going to go there. There are things in our culture that we have said, that's okay. That's all right. You can get away with it. You can do it. We can celebrate it. But it doesn't make it right. And even if you don't know Scripture, you know it's not right. Joseph here, the law has not been given, but the law is not needed to say that this is wrong. There are things that you know that fall into the same category. This is one of those dangerous situations, though, because you do have Joseph here between Potiphar and his wife. It's the quintessential rock and hard place. Do I do what she says or do I not? This is difficult. But I love what we see here out of Joseph. He not only refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. He went to some degree here to keep himself holy and righteous. You know, this is one of those things. What do you do in the situation? Do you fight or do you flee? To mix biblical metaphors here, Joseph is in the lion's den. And you have to be careful when you're in the lion's den not to get bit. Verse 11, one day Joseph went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She, that's Potiphar's wife, caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw he left his cloak in her hand and run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed, and when he heard my scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." Joseph's story can be quite frustrating because it's just this pattern of rise and fall and rise and fall. And as soon as things seem to feel better, to go better, he's just right back to where he was. This is a difficult situation. You would think, like, look, I'm sold as a slave, but at least I'm in this house and things are going well. He probably has a certain amount of freedom because of his position. And now this. I don't know about you guys, but when I read the Bible, I try to picture it. What happens here? Do you have the head of the household running around outside naked? Kind of what it reads like, right? So you have Potiphar's wife who has to do something because this is abnormal. This shouldn't be happening. And so she knows that either she's going to be in trouble or he's going to be in trouble. And so she makes a decision. This is the second time that Joseph's outer garment, his cloak, has been talked about. What you see here is that the clothes don't make the man. He had the coat of many colors. It's been stripped of. Does that mean the dream is dead? No. And so now he has this position here in Potiphar's house. Does that mean that the dream will die? No. The clothes don't make this man. In this situation, you see how she responds, though. He's the head of the household, but she immediately retitles him. He's the Hebrew. She tries to degrade him by using his people, his background, who he is. She uses this term to immediately call him an outsider. He's socially rejected. He's low class. To remind everyone, he's the slave here. He's not the head of household anymore. Now, he's merely someone who was purchased. When I got to be a certain age and friends could drive or I could drive, I remember my parents having a talk with me of saying, you might end up in some places that you shouldn't be. And you need to have a plan before you end up in those places. When you end up in one of these moments, my parents gave me the use us as an excuse kind of out. Anytime you use us as an excuse, we'll come get you. You blame us, you call us lame, whatever you have to do, you use us, Because my parents, and probably many of you have understood this, that sometimes you get into situations that if you're not careful, you're just going to fall into the patterns and habits that are in the situation. I think often what happens is we get in these moments and we see what's happening, but you know what? We are going to just fight through it. The way I thought about it growing up, you just flex through it, right? You're in some kind of pain or some kind of difficult moment, you flex through it, everything will be just fine. But What Joseph does here is he does the true courageous thing. He flees. He runs. He knows he has to leave if he's going to keep his integrity. You know, it's like a silly saying. The longer you hang out in the barber shop, the more likely you are to get a haircut. The more likely you hang out in the wrong place, the more likely you're going to become the wrong person. I think when we think about our kids and our teenagers, we're like, yeah, you don't need to be there. But as somewhere along the way, as adults, we think, well, we can do it, and we'll just fight through it. It'll be fine. After all, it might be my coworkers, it might be my boss, it could be my friend that I've had for so long. How do I tell them that I can't be here? Could be family members. Joseph flees. What we see here is that just because he leaves, he avoids sin, but he doesn't avoid punishment. He's going to face some punishment. It's going to be difficult, but in this moment, he has a choice. Am I going to face Potiphar and what he may bring, or do I cross Potiphar or do I cross God? That's his choice. And for him, then there is no choice. Paul will write in 1 Corinthians, you need to flee from sexual immorality. I wonder if he has this moment in mind. You need to flee from these moments. That's the courageous move. That's the brave move, is to get yourself out of these moments. Not just to build into a moment where maybe we compare. You know what? They're all the way in. I'm just dipping a toe in. I'm doing pretty good. No, the biblical example is to flee. So Joseph flees. And just because he avoids sin doesn't mean he avoids punishment. In fact, what happens is that Potiphar arrests Joseph and he throws him in prison, the very prison where Pharaoh puts his prisoners. So one way to think of it is now Joseph is a political prisoner. Oftentimes, I think we believe that God works in some kind of quid pro quo manner. That, almost like a vending machine. That if I just put in the right amount of money and I press the right buttons, that God will give me the right outcome. And if you've been around church long enough, you probably know that that's not the right thinking. And yet, you probably fall into it, right? Haven't you ever had a moment before when, you're in your room by yourself or your car or whatever, and you've just been given some type of bad news and you go, why me? Didn't I do everything right? It becomes your prayer. Why me, God? I'm a good person. I did what I was supposed to do. I've checked every box, dotted every I, crossed every T. I've been doing what you asked me to do. Can't you imagine Joseph saying that? He's now back in prison. Can't you imagine him going, wait, what did I do wrong? God, where did I lose your favor? Why are you making this happen to me? Well, we see, what we are able to see because we have the benefit of time and the end of the story, is that we see that God is using evil actions by people to put Joseph in a place that will bless many people. Joseph is not there yet. He's not in that moment yet. In fact, as we turn the page over to Genesis 40, we see just that the cycle restarts. Joseph is on a roller coaster. As soon as things get good, it goes right back down. So he's in Potiphar's house. Things are going good. He's now head person other than Potiphar in charge. He gets thrown in prison, and after a short time, it reads that, guess what? He's running the prison. In fact, it looks like the guy who runs the prison has the best gig. He's not even working anymore. I mean, Joseph's doing everything. And it's in this moment that there are two people from Pharaoh's court that get thrown in prison, the cupbearer and the chief baker. And they are in prison and they have a dream. And this is what we read in verse 6. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, why do you look so sad today? Now, this is not the point of the story, but don't you ever read the Bible and you just want to go like, well, we were in Pharaoh's court waiting on him, and now we're in prison. How should we look? I mean, it feels obvious, right? Okay, verse 8. We both had dreams, they answered. There's no one to interpret them. Joseph said, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. Now, Joseph is a dreamer. We covered this from the beginning. He has been given a dream by God. He has some type of insight into dreams. And I don't know what you personally feel about dreams or believe about them, but he certainly believes that they are from God in this case. And now Joseph says something here that we shouldn't miss. Interpretations belong to God, so tell me your dreams. Joseph is making a claim about who he is. He is essentially some kind of, you might use the word prophet. That he has an ability from God to interpret this, that he has a gifting for this, that he will speak for God when he answers dreams. That even in Egypt, the power of God has transferred there. That Egypt has its own set of gods, but it's this God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's this God that has power here. So he's going to help interpret the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker, which sounds like your new favorite TV show, The Cupbearer and the Baker. Maybe it's a podcast, I don't know. But they both have a dream. They both involve the number 3. One will get a positive interpretation, the other quite negative. First, the cupbearer, verse 12. This is what your dream means, Joseph said. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. You will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand just as you used to when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh. Get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews. And even here, I've done nothing to deserve being put in this dungeon. So, the baker, meanwhile, is going to get a much less favorable outcome. And his interpretation is that he will be dead within 3 days. In this moment, Joseph doesn't handle it like I would handle it. We're dejected. We have a dream that needs interpreting. And if I were Joseph, I would say, hey, I will interpret this for you, but I'm going to need something in return. Okay? And they would go, I'm in prison. Anything, right? And I would have them on the hook. Joseph doesn't do that. Joseph offers them exactly what they want before getting secured what he needs. He would not have been a good poker player, right? Joseph offers the interpretation, and then you see this moment of vulnerability, a window into how he thinks about what's happened. Joseph knows that this has not gone the way it should. He knows he should not have to be here. He has done nothing wrong. Now, he does change the story a little bit. You can see him start to lay a layer of protection over his brothers. Because the true story is that my brothers sold me here. But he says, I was forcibly carried off. How would you feel if you were Joseph? If you were in this moment? Remember me. The audience that first read this story or heard this story knew that at some point God's favor turned on Joseph. That things started to go better for him. That things, they might even know where he ends up. That there was redemption. And you could ask yourself, is this the moment that it finally turns? Is this the moment that he will rise again? What Joseph does is he puts a lot of eggs in the cupbearer basket. And he says, please show me a kindness by remembering me. This kindness is the same word for loyalty. He's essentially asking, be loyal to me. I was loyal to you. It's the same word that we see in Genesis 39, right, what we just read, that God was kind to Joseph. That's how he prospered. God was loyal to Joseph. Now he's asking for loyalty from his neighbor. Here's how the story ends. Verse 20. The 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday. He gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbaker to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph said to him in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. When Genesis was written, it was not written with chapters and verses. However, whenever we did break that up, this was a good part to break it up. Because again, if you're watching this as a TV show, you'd go, well, what happens next? Because in a macro sense, nothing has changed for Joseph. We just read 2 chapters, and he's essentially right back where he started. Sure, he's in prison instead of Potiphar's house, but he's right back where he was. Every time he takes a step forward, he goes 2 steps back. He cannot get out of this negative cycle he seems to be in. At the end of all of this, even though he's done some good things, he's forgotten. No one remembers him. He's just there. Put yourself in Joseph's shoes, in his prison cell, in his dungeon, as he calls it. What would you think? What would your prayers be like? Would you give it up? Would you start and try and pray to somebody else? Would you ask, why me? This story, it reminds us of a few things, or maybe teaches us a few things when we look back on it. And it might speak to your situation as well today. The first is this: humans will be unfaithful. From the beginning, Joseph's story is marked by people who have been unfaithful. It starts right there with his brothers. His brothers should have been faithful to him as their brother. They should have been faithful to their father, to care for all of his children. But they're not. They want to, either out of their jealousy, envy, maybe they want to be in charge, they're unfaithful. Potiphar's wife is unfaithful first to her husband. She should never have propositioned Joseph. She's unfaithful. And then when that's not going well for her, she's unfaithful to Joseph. And she lies, tears down his reputation, ends him up in prison. The cupbearer, who in his moment of anxiety and grief, who's in some way plagued by a dream, his heart is set at ease, and yet he is unfaithful. Joseph is where he is because of the decisions of others. He is bearing the consequence of their sin. Their sin has caused ripples and waves that he's caught up in. Have you ever been there? The truth, church, is that people will be unfaithful. People will hurt you. They will put their interests above your own. And the really unfortunate truth is that you will also do the same to them. Humans will be unfaithful. I'm not saying that this is right. I'm saying that this is. This is what we see happen. This is why all of the messages we hear in the New Testament about how a church treats each other are so countercultural and so difficult and so needed. Like when Paul writes in Philippians chapter 2, don't put your interests ahead of another, but rather, in humility, make yourself less. It's hard. And it's a poignant message because people don't do this. They look first to save their own skin before they think about another. Because you can imagine this is what the cupbearer did. He rejoiced because he was set free. He got about back to his task. And he completely forgets Joseph. People, human beings, will be unfaithful. But God is faithful. What we see in the story of Joseph is not only is God faithful, but he's active and involved. God is not merely an observer in this story. And again, I want you to hear this story because there's a lot of truth in your story. You're just not at the end of your story. God is not merely an observer, not in your life, not in the life of Joseph, not in history itself. God is not the clockmaker who constructed it, set it, and forget it. But our God is active and involved. Even if you think about Joseph's story without jumping to the end, you see that God is active and involved. God put this dream on Joseph. He has a dream for Israel, and he's working to bring it to fruition. I don't believe for a second that God caused these evil acts to happen. I don't think he asked Potiphar's wife to proposition Joseph. And yet, God said, this is a moment that I will use to bring Joseph closer to Pharaoh as a way to bless God's people and the entire world. We don't know it yet, but God is with Joseph. God is actively involved to bring his story to a good ending. God is faithful to Joseph. Now, that does not mean that your Bible claims that it's all going to work out for everyone in every circumstance. Unfortunately, the Bible does not claim that life will be easy, fun, and light. Wouldn't that be nice? Joseph is going to spend years in prison. The next line we'll read next week, Genesis 41, is 2 years later. 2 years later. And it does not mean that God has been unfaithful. See, the difference between us and God is we are far more limited than he is. I'll just speak for me. I think because of the day and age we live, we can know everything. We can see everything. We understand how it's all going to work. But we are so small compared to our God. But you and I, probably Joseph too, though we don't have it, would be sitting in this dungeon going, why us? And God is just saying, just be patient. I'm still with you. In fact, it's hard for us to understand the gravity of the story because many of us know the end of the story. It's hard for us to resonate with where Joseph is. But he has to have these moments where he feels like God has forgotten him, that God is not loyal to him. Have you ever been there? Or you felt like that? The last thing we see in Joseph's story, in this section anyway, is that character isn't built in the palace, it's revealed in the prison. Because I think if I were Joseph, I think I would be tempted to do whatever it took to fight or flee or free, whatever it took to move through the situation. I would be anything that I would need to be to get out. But then you arrive in the palace and you go, okay, now it's time to be God's man. It's time to bring this dream to fruition. That's not the way it works. See, oftentimes we think that in the end, we'll finally become the person we want, but we don't have to be it all along the way. What we see in the story of Joseph is that he is God's man every step of the way. That these difficult moments reveal that truth in him to us, the reader. He was always that person. So you might be tempted occasionally to, in the situations you find yourself in, to try and learn how to adapt, to figure out how to maybe just make it easier on yourself. And yet, who are you going to be is the question. Joseph was God's man every step of the way. He is reaching out, he's representing and reaching out to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Joseph might feel forgotten, but he begs to be remembered. He asks to be remembered. Just like God remembers Abraham, just like God remembers Rachel, our God remembers. Have you ever felt forgotten? Later in Israel's story, there will be one anointed king named David. David, as a young man, is anointed king, but does not become king for many years. And if you know his story between those parts is very difficult. He has to run for his life for years. He ends up living in caves for many years. And you can imagine that he had a similar prayer. I was anointed to be king. I was chosen to have a palace, not a cave. What would you pray in those moments? Many of you are in a similar moment today. That you might be at the very beginning of your 2 years of asking God, have you forgotten me? Will you remember me? And you might pray a similar prayer that David prayed. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes or I'll sleep in my death. My enemy will say, I have overcome him. My foes will rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. This is found in your Bible, Psalm 13. And it's a prayer that there are some in here today that need to be praying. God can handle it. How long, Lord? How long will you forget me? how long until you remember me? For some of you in here today, I want to challenge you to pray that prayer this week. To humbly go before your God and say, how long? How long? I love where David ends up, but I will trust in your unfailing love. That's what the heart of faith looks like. To be able to go to God truthfully and honestly, but also to understand this is a God who loves you and is with you and is for you. The second thing I want you to do is I don't want you to walk that road alone. Joseph found himself in that dungeon alone, but you don't find yourself alone. As we close today, our shepherds and their wives will be around the room. And we want you to go and bring this prayer to them. That you might be right at the forefront praying, how long, Lord? How long? Regardless of how long it might be, you don't walk alone. The promise of the church is that we will walk with you. We can help you with anything once you come while we stand and sing.